Thank you, Ben. By the way, I was rereading your story 2 nights ago before I went to bed, and I got to that part about the grandmother started crying. Next, we're going to hear from James Constantino Bautista. I first came across James Constantino Bautista when he submitted a piece about what it is to be a Filipino American, and that was included in Paula's anthology Field of Mirrors in 2008. And ever since then, every time I come across his writing, I've been very impressed. His poetry and this short story as well, it's like, whoa. And a very talented young man. James Constantino Bautista has 2 places on opposite sides of the Pacific Ocean he calls home: the California East Bay and Imus, Cavite, Philippines. His work has appeared in Field of Mirrors, an anthology of Filipino American writers. He's also contributed articles on Pinoy identity and social change to University of California, Berkeley's Maganda magazine. Oh, by the way, you probably know already, but they also use that piece in Field of Mirrors at Skyline College. It's almost like a required reading. Exactly. And she told me, yes, I use that piece every semester. James, who completed a bachelor's degree in communication studies at USF, is the youngest of our readers tonight. James.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Thank you, Reni, so much for this opportunity. This is my first book reading ever, and this is both an honor, but it's also difficult for me because I lost my lolo 2 months ago, and it imbued my story with a brand new significance, brand new poignance. So I'm going to read an excerpt from A Cherished Haunting. Kuya, where are we going? Lola's house? Asked Alvin. No, we're going to the cemetery, replied Jornel. Let's do it, I said, grinning, as we sprinted to catch up with him. I wasn't trying to be brave. It was far too warm for my shivering to possibly be attributed to the climate, but I could feel the adrenaline like an electric current running up my back as we trekked through the darkness. These streets were alien to me. Each corner closely resembled the last, so it was obvious that these boys were my only hope of returning home by morning. But I trusted them for some reason. Maybe my body could sense that they were kin. The old bell tower of the town cathedral was visible in the distance as we headed east. The darkness ahead swallowed us like a funerary drape, but the gray stones on the right side of the road retained an eerie glow. The panic realization that we were standing before an endless stretch of graves choked us into silence. Close to the road were a few tombstones nudged at various angles by the serpentine roots of an old tree, giving the appearance of having been manipulated by subterranean hands. Above us, the tree's branches were dry and spider-like. In my peripheral vision, they resembled the talons of a nocturnal predator. Kuya James, are there ghosts in the States? Asked David. Apart from the slap of our slippers on the hard dirt, his voice seemed to be the only sound for miles. I thought for a second. Not really, I've never seen one. Ganun ba talaga? Said Alvin. Before I could answer, something to the left of us made a rustling noise. Eric let out a yelp of surprise. Before I knew it, we were running the opposite direction through an open gate, and we didn't stop until we reached a row of caged-in mausoleums. Wait, is that... As David's cell phone glowed in his hand, I noticed something behind the bars of the nearest enclosure. I directed his hand downward, illuminating the inscription on the tomb's floor. In engraved letters, clearly legible, it was Constantino, our family name. I kneeled slowly over my Lolo's grave, inspecting the tomb of our humble dynasty. The leftmost stones indeed bore the names of my great-grandparents. Jornel and the guys were my second cousins, so this man and woman specifically were the source of our connection. Our town was small maybe, but this didn't make it any less remarkable that we had stumbled upon this particular tomb tonight. Beneath us rested a couple that we never truly knew, and yet whose legacy we necessarily represented. Was there a force at work here other than coincidence? I said a silent prayer, humbled and at the same time spooked to have arrived at this spot. After this, mostly out of pity for Eric, I led my cousins back to the main road. I hadn't seen these guys in 8 years. We had gone through drastically different childhoods, separated by the vast Pacific, yet I felt as if I'd known them all my life. Just when we started to relax, basking in the illusion that the whole world was asleep except for us, a guttural sound emerged from the other side of the street. Immediately, the barking of an unseen dog exploded in our ears. Panic gripped us. Before I could think, my legs lunged into motion. It was a primal feeling, like shards of ice lashing against my neck as the image of salivating jaws materialized in my mind. I ran faster and faster, all the way to Lola's house, blocks away, without pausing once to look back. The staircase leading up to my great-grandparents' house was steep. It was littered at the moment with the hastily removed sandals of a dozen descendants. This residence during the Japanese occupation was used by the invaders to set up their radio communications equipment. In the decades after the war, countless of my relatives were raised here. Memories had been etched in every crevice, and now it was my turn to jot down my own. Returning to the States after a trip to the homeland feels like a death. I remember waking up the first night I was back, horrified that I was alone. I was stuck in a temporal void, unsure of the time and day. The only thing ever present, the only thing I was intensely aware of was the feeling that I missed my family. I'm about the age now that my lolo and his father before him joined the U.S. Navy. The sacrifice they made and how profoundly their impossible choice impacted my life was almost fully tangible at moments like this. My Lola managed to give my mom a happy childhood in this lonely place while Lola was at sea. Even my cousins, whom I longed to see again, were but another facet of my life that I owed to this ancestral connection. I was alone tonight. My parents were working late. I walked down the hall to the bathroom, groping for the light switch. I peered down the dark corridor and felt something strangely familiar. Fear. The chill I felt transported me back to that night in the graveyard, to the frantic chase back to a house that was home before I even knew the meaning of the word. I never cry, but now I found myself washing away my tears in the sink. Then I looked behind me, sensing that something had moved in the mirror as I raised my head. I remember telling David that there were no ghosts in the States. Was this true? Oddly, as I crossed the dark hall to my room, I didn't want it to be true. Making contact with a spirit would be comforting in a way, because it would prove that all the things we ever imagined about life after death were possible, even likely. And if it happened to be a departed relative paying me a visit, I would honestly welcome such a haunting. "Is that you, Lolo?" I asked softly in the dark, remembering the night I stumbled upon his tomb by chance. "If it is you, Lolo, thank you for everything."